Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. One of the distinctions that I think is really helpful to make is the difference between sensitivity and reactivity. And I feel like in our society, those kind of get mushed together. And we could talk about that in terms of emotionality or energetic sensitivity. But I want to kind of tease them apart because, again, that's something that gets lumped together. People who are energetically sensitive are often also emotionally sensitive. And if we look at that from the most pragmatic point of view, it's sort of like someone who has a really keen sense of smell or a high level of hearing. They can hear quiet sounds that someone else wouldn't be able to hear. Or their vision is better than 20/20. They can see really clearly. It's a calibration that allows a lot more distinctions, and you can be energetically sensitive and emotionally sensitive. People who are empathic often have their energetic sensitivity oriented toward other humans, and so they read a lot of nuance. As an aside, one of the ways that men and women can trip over things, and this isn't true for all men or all women, but in general, there's an ability to read a lot more subtle facial expressions by women and a lot more nuances of tone of voice. And that's some of the wiring of our brain, and it doesn't mean that men can't be better at those things than women as a learned skill or a soul knowledge or a disposition, but it's kind of an interesting thing where a woman will have thought she communicated really clearly with tone, which for another average woman would have absolutely been the case, and it's not something that strikes a man as clear communication. And so there are lots of ways that we can see different distinctions in our calibration for being able to read or hear or understand something. And one of the pain points that I hear a lot from my sensitive clients, whether we're talking about energetic sensitivity or emotional sensitivity, is the feeling that they're too sensitive. So this could have been something that they've said to themselves a lot of times or something that other people have said to them. And I want to offer some bigger perspective on this because it becomes a pain point, a place that we can end up rejecting ourselves, a source of shame, and the more intensity of emotion there is around this story that we should be less sensitive, the higher our reactivity is going to be, and the more we're going to be mired in pain when something lands as an ouch. And there are a lot of different layers to that, so hopefully I can meander my way through the conversation with myself and hopefully with you as the listener, and find a way to illuminate some distinctions that I'm hopeful will be helpful for you in feeling right with yourself at exactly the level of sensitivity you have. So one of the things that's just good to know about energetic sensitivity is it can feel like a disability. It's honestly harder for a sensitive person to walk through an airport because there's so much more stimulation. And I believe this is similar to people who are, for example, ADD. It's harder if everything pulls your attention in your mind in a way that someone who has more ability to focus their attention and isn't pulled and distracted by things that they've told their brain aren't actionable to function in the world. And so there's a skill set that goes with managing energetic sensitivity so it isn't debilitating, that is about learning to have shields and filters and manage it, because it's frankly a lot harder to function if your sensitivity is really high and you haven't mastered a skill set of learning how to protect yourself. And a really good starting place, if this is new information, is Ted Andrews' book, Psychic Protection, because it offers a huge range of approaches and you can find the one that works best for you. It's the most comprehensive manual on the subject that I've seen anywhere. And so, if you're highly sensitive and that's becoming debilitating because the world is so dang loud and you can't hear yourself think and you get overstimulated and overwhelmed, and that really sucks, it's a skill set. It's a skill set to be able to manage the input, put up shields, put up filters, and be able to control how that sense shows up. So I wouldn't trade my energetic sensitivity for the world, even though the unmanaged version was stressful enough that it caused me to dissociate as a child. But as an adult with a mastery of the skill set, there are experiences in old growth forests that someone who isn't able to feel the nuance of energy don't get to have. And there's so much that is really beautiful and exquisite in my life that higher level of sensitivity allows me to enjoy and delight in. And it's just a huge, huge source of pleasure. So energetic sensitivity is a gift and a challenge in the way that the modern era has been organized, and it's very manageable if you're willing to just put some time into developing a skill set to manage it properly. And the hard thing is just that we didn't get trained as children, because we got to learn how to use our sense of smell and touch and all of those other things in really effective ways to be in the world as kids, but nobody was training us in this energetic sensitivity part. So on the emotional sensitivity side, this can be a psychic gift, it can be an energetic awareness, or it can just be a really good awareness. Like you may be someone who's very sensitive to being able to differentiate tone and people's reactions and their body language. And so you notice an emotional imbalance or reaction in another person a lot sooner than another person might. And you may even notice before they do. And so that's just a skill set. It could give you a great opportunity to be a therapist or a salesperson or all these other things where rapport with someone is really helpful. A really great school teacher. It's a beautiful skill. It does tend to go hand in hand with codependency, so you'll probably want to do a little bit of psychological work not to overhelp people who appear to be in distress. So there's a little bit of exhaustion if you make someone having a hard day actionable when you don't have the energy to really be supportive or helpful, or when you need to be focused on something else. So being able to be present with reading people but not feel compelled to rescue them from whatever they're feeling is an important distinction. So again, that's a skill set. And then there's the part that can cause friction in relationships. And so when you're so sensitive is used as a criticism. And I want to talk about when we say that to ourselves first, because that is a different case than someone else. When we say that to ourselves, it's usually because we're having reactivity. So we've had someone say something unkind or that landed badly. And one part of this is just, I think that a lot of people, if they could avoid ever having their feelings hurt ever again, would love to install that download. Like if it was an app where you could like override ouch, ouch, ouch on the inside, we would love to do that. And that's just not the gig with the human condition. So learning how to be in right relationship to your emotions is super important, because a lot of us do a lot of emotional numbing and shutting down our emotions. And when we do that, we end up with high emotional reactivity. And what I mean by that is a small comment can end up creating a huge emotional reaction. So if something pragmatically would sting a little bit and ends up being agonizing, you probably have a lot of what I would call emotional debt. So if you've criticized yourself about your weight and then someone makes a comment about your weight, it's going to land a lot worse because you've said it to yourself 100 times and it's already such a pain point. Whereas if you're happy and secure in your body and someone says something about your weight, you might be like, wow, that's really intrusive. What made you think that that was okay? That's ridiculous. Move along. And so around this reactivity thing where we have a really big response, it's uncomfortable. It hurts when that happens. And a lot of times we go into arguing with the reality that we're having a big emotional reaction, so we aren't actually helping to calm ourselves. So imagine the absurdity of someone having a 2-year-old who just melted down in the middle of the store explaining why it was illogical and unreasonable that they were crying. Like, that's a ridiculous strategy. As a parent, hopefully you have a certain pragmatism that, sometimes getting knocked down by gravity too many times in one day and then thwarted in your desire for a cookie is just too much, and you need to cry it out, and then you'll be restored and you'll be back to whatever comes next. And you can have pragmatism and compassion in holding space for that child. And that's not what a lot of us got as people. We live in a society that is terrible with emotion, and I think we've gotten worse in the modern time because of the ability to buy distractions so cheaply. And I love our internet connected Facebook world. I'm a fan, and yet so many people, when they have an emotion rise, they can go to food or alcohol or Facebook or an infinite number of distractions and not really be quiet with themselves. And so they're tuning out what they're feeling emotionally until it's under a ton of pressure. And that's when one little thing tips someone over to an extreme response. So the person who's sobbing on the side of the freeway because they got a flat tire, they're probably under some emotional debt. It's probably the last straw, the straw that broke the camel's back, as we say. There's probably a lot of pressure that's built up. And so that's where having proactive practices that, much as you might not enjoy it, clean out the closets on old, painful emotions, is time and energy incredibly well spent. I help people with that. A good therapist can help someone with that. Meditation helps with that. Time in nature. Just taking time to be with yourself without distraction and breathe all the way into the belly and see what shows up emotionally that wants to be felt and wants to move is really important. So, for example, if you've never grieved any of the losses in your life, the loss of a pet might be debilitating. And that's a really big thing. Like, I'm not making light of how acutely painful that loss can be in its own right. But if grief is finally moving in an overwhelming way, it's pretty hard if you grieve all the losses that have happened in your life at the same time. And people get really scared when they get overwhelmed emotionally. It's really terrifying to have an emotion bigger than what you think you can contain. And that's where it gets messy, because people will shut down and numb emotion in really not sustainable ways. So drinking alcohol if you're an alcoholic, or all of these things, spending money they don't have, really, really extreme addictive behaviors are usually about, I'm so overwhelmed by emotionality that I have to shut it down. So they come up with something that has a bigger emotional response to help them numb. But then it's a vicious cycle because, then they have to deal with whatever mess is being created in their life. So if you're high reactivity, meaning you have a really big response to a small input, it's not necessarily that you're too sensitive, but you may have some emotional debt that's built up, and cleaning that out may be necessary. So one of the things I really watch for myself, just very pragmatically as witness consciousness, when I have an ouch, I don't like the feeling, but I check in with myself as to whether it's disproportional. And if it's disproportional, there may be some history that needs healing, which isn't my favorite, but I've learned to lean into that rather than try to stuff it back into the closet, at least on the days when I'm on my game. And I take stock of my life. Maybe I've been burning the candle at both ends. Maybe I'm not getting enough downtime. Maybe there's a place that I'm raw and a little overwhelmed to start with, and therefore my emotional resilience isn't available. And one of the things to look at is not the intensity of the feeling in the moment, but how quickly you're restored. So if you have a ow, that really stung, but a day later it's out of your head and you never think about it again, that's a good indication that things are cycling through. Whereas if your mind is recapitulating obnoxious things that were said to you years later, that's an indication that, you might need some facilitated healing or some practices. There's some good ways to clean that up. But again, it takes the discipline to say, I really don't need to be thinking about the mean thing that my teacher said to me in 7th grade anymore. That's such water under the bridge. And I want to take right action to clean that out. And if you want some help with that, that's one of the things that I work with people one-on-one about, because I think it's so helpful. And any good therapist can be ideally really effective. So lots and lots of practitioners can help you get out of recapitulating the cruel things that were said to you throughout your life. When I do get triggered, I do my best to work on it really immediately so I don't develop neural pathways where my mind thinks it needs to keep bringing it up again and again and again. And most of the time, I have a really proportional response where how angry or offended or hurt I am is proportional. I don't like the flavor, but then the restoring myself is a pretty simple, quick process. So that's just an underlying level of self-investing in emotional and psychological health, because high levels of emotional reactivity and low levels of resilience, meaning it takes you a really long time to recover, are pretty miserable. They make your head so loud, they hurt so much, it's so hard to sustain relationships. So it's good to self-diagnose, and you're wrong and bad isn't really helpful, but looking at this as a learnable skill. Because if you're just too sensitive, you're pretty much stuck in this miserable, I'm wrong and bad and suffering's my own fault for being wrong and bad. Whereas if you're like, oh, I need to pay off some emotional debt by cleaning out some old stuff, and I need to cultivate a skill set so that I'm less reactive and more resilient when somebody steps on my toes, as they're bound to do, because humans are just messy that way. That happens. We get bumped into all the time. So that's kind of an overview. And again, if you treat it as a learnable skill, just like shields and filters, if you're energetically sensitive and overwhelmed, you have something you can do about it. You're like, oh, yeah, skill set. I could go learn a skill set. You've learned a lot of skill sets, some of them not so consensually, like possibly high school algebra, but there's the ability to make a study of something and make considerable progress over a very short period of time. So that growth mindset instead of the fixed mindset is really, really helpful in thinking about this problem. So now coming to the other side of it, what if someone else is giving you feedback of their opinion that you're too emotionally sensitive, or you're just too sensitive overall? And that's a little bit complicated because it's very much a consider the source. And it can be really hard to consider the source. Some people are really good at consider the source. They're like, consider the source, that person is having a mess in their own life. They're not a reliable person to give me feedback. They don't even understand their own mess. I wouldn't want to deal with what they're dealing with. They're not qualified. They have different values, goals, agendas. Throw it out. But some of us don't have that discernment with feedback. We don't pause to say, consider the source. Like, is this a reliable mirror, or is this person coming with agenda? And the trouble is that when someone says to you, who isn't a skillful therapist, something like, wow, I think we could work on some of the reactivity and you'd have a better experience, but is accusing you of being wrong, like you're too sensitive, you shouldn't be so sensitive, stop being so sensitive. They have an agenda where there's something in it for them. And there are two ways that this could go. So one way is someone who has a really high level of emotional numbing is very insensitive about how they treat other people. And then when people call them on it, they make the person wrong and bad. So they try to make it, it's the wrong way to say it. Their adaptive behavior for shutting down conversations about the effect of their actions is to make it so expensive to bring it up with them because they have such a bad reaction. Oh, you're just so sensitive. What I did was fine. That's their protection. And I think that as an empath, being with people who are under aware of the impact of their actions on others, like one of the things I screen for in anyone I'm dealing with, whether I'm taking on a client or a friendship or partnering with someone to, work on any project, is how aware are they of the impact of their actions on others? Because if you have somebody who's really rude and abrupt and incredibly oblivious to how that affects people, or who breaks promises, or who is way below average in social skills and then blames everyone who has a negative reaction, that's just a mess I don't want to deal with. I'm not going to enjoy it. It's not going to give me the rapport. I get that sometimes people are in such a stress state that they don't have bandwidth left to be elegant in moving through the world. So one of my students described it from her philosophy professor as, imagine we're all in sinking boats, and some people's boats are sinking faster than others. Some people are really thoughtful and have a good strategy for keeping ahead of the water coming in, and some people wait to bail out their boats until they're almost sunk. And so if somebody throws a bucket of water in your face, they may just be bailing out their boat in a really messy way because it's gotten urgent and critical. And it's just depersonalizing. It's not saying that behavior is okay. You probably want to motor your boat away from the flailing person who declined your help and is making a big mess. But at the same time, there's a sort of a depersonalizing. And I honor when someone's in such an acute state, they just don't have bandwidth to pay attention to how much friction they're creating with other people through their lack of skill, and they're not motivated to clean it up. So it's better to just walk away. I don't necessarily make them bad and wrong, but it's just a discernment of, this isn't a good place for me to hang out. As an aside, sometimes you see that with someone who's been really into people pleasing, who then gets into therapy and is like, I'm not going to people please anymore. And I'm like, that's great. It's a wonderful growth step. And let me come back in 6 months when the pendulum has rebalanced, because I've seen people go from people pleasing to finding their yes and their no and going into what an objective observer would think of as quite selfish, and then finding the middle ground. And I get that it's really good to know what's right and wrong for you. And some people are really out of touch with that. They respond to what other people want before even checking in with themselves. So getting their no on is a really healthy growth step. But if they do it in a real hard pendulum swing, it's not super pleasant for the people around them. So if you're dealing with someone who's telling you that you're too sensitive, and most people would have an issue with them, then it may be better to ask yourself the question, what am I hoping to get out of this? Or what am I afraid to give up that's keeping me here, that's keeping me trying to create connection with someone who doesn't feel good? They don't treat me in a way that works for me. I have a lot of discernment. Like, there are people who think it's hysterical to play practical jokes. I don't like that. I literally don't have anyone in my life who plays practical jokes on me, and I'm really happy to keep it that way. There are people who think that's the most fun thing ever. My brother-in-law plays practical jokes on his brother like crazy. That's their dynamic. But he has the good sense that, that wouldn't be a great thing with his sister-in-law, which is marvelous. We get along really well as a result of his discernment of where that is not invited. People who like to use their trust to try to get somebody to believe an outrageous story. I just trust the people I care about and I'm connected to. So I'm the most gullible person imaginable, and that just doesn't feel good. So people who play the game of trying to get you to believe something outrageous, they're not my people. And so if you are participating with someone and there's a lot of pain, again, first look to, do I have some reactivity to clean out? Because that's important. But then from there, a perfectly healthy, reasonable person just might not enjoy that. I am emotionally sensitive, and I don't like roughhousing on the emotional and psychological level. It's not my jam. Other people love it. I so honor that. They should go have other friends who aren't me. It totally works. There's an abundance of people. We can sort for what's the right thing for us. And then the other side of it is, if someone's giving you that feedback and it isn't an agenda where they're being really messy and they don't want to look at their stuff. So an example of this would be someone who you walk on eggshells because they go from zero to furious. They drop their toast and suddenly they're screaming profanities and stomping around and throwing their coffee cup in the sink and breaking it. That's an extreme example, but you get those people who are like one teeny tiny aggravation away from being rageful. And if you're a sensitive, empathic person, that's probably going to be a path of misery if you try to hang with that person. I know if you have teenagers who are in that space where their hormones are just making them so aggravated. It's so hard to be a teenager, and then any thwarting can really make it acute. So sorry if you have teenagers, I have compassion for both of you. But for adult relationships, that person, if you're sensitive, is going to be really unkind. And so looking at why you might choose to be in that relationship and what could use some healing to make a more life-affirming choice, because hanging out with someone with anger management issues would be a deal breaker. And I'm not going to get confused and have them tell me I'm being too sensitive because they're stomping around. Like, I'm just not. As an aside, especially as a woman, if it's a man being angry, we're biologically hardwired as women to have reactivity to anger in a man's voice. And there's just a history of violence across the ages, and our brains have prioritized that an angry man could be a threat. And I get that this sucks for both sexes, because there are lots of men who are just frustrated and expressing themselves and doing so in a legitimate, healthy way, and women who are reactive. And the men would say, I'd never hit a woman. I've never hit a woman. And the woman would still say, like, wow, I drop a bunch of adrenaline and my heart speeds up if you have anger in your tone. And it's just it's something to be aware of if you have someone who's angry and loud and frustrated a lot, that just might not be something you can work with. Or you may just need to have a really good strategy to, good time to go to the store. Let me go hang at the library. I'm going to go sit under a tree. Honey, I think you should go for a drive. You're really loud in the house right now. Whatever it is, whatever you work out in a calm moment. But it's just a good thing to be aware of. So coming back around, the other place that the feedback could come that your sensitivity, meaning reactivity, is really high, is healthy people who genuinely want to connect with you and who are making an effort to kindly give you feedback of something that's getting in the way of the relationship. And there's a lot of nuance here, because a lot of times people who want to sustain relationship with someone try to get the other person to change rather than doing their own work, or take too much on themselves. And there's a balance for both people being healthy and sustainable enough that there's a level of ease. And so if you have to tweak 37 things to be able to sit in the same room with someone, that's a lot of work. I feel like that's a younger person's game. I'm more like, hey, how much ease do we have right out of the door? And then for conflicts around this, there's a nuanced balance to how much is mine to work on, how am I honestly doing my work, and how much is the other person's to really look at their stuff and make some adjustments. And sometimes it can be confusing for where to draw that line. But certainly for me in my 20s, a friend described me as thin-skinned enough to bleed in a high wind. And she said it after I had really cleaned that up. So it wasn't actually an ouch. It sounds like something that would be an ouch, but she was expressing her gratitude that I'd sat my ass down in therapy, because she said it was really hard to be your friend. You were so reactive to really neutral things, and she didn't like me being all blown up and emotional and hurt and loud and reactive. It's really hard when you say something neutral and you're in a calm place and someone is flying off the handle and hurt and upset. And if somebody loves you, they never want you to be hurt and upset. And again, there's a lot of nuance to this, but in retrospect, I could really find it. I knew that I had interpersonal health issues to clean up, which is why I went to therapy in the first place. I wasn't getting the results I wanted. I didn't have good people skills. And so I went and worked on that. I got help. I had a growth mindset. I had all these engineering teams where I relentlessly drove everyone to my solution and wasn't collaborative and didn't listen and bullied everyone into doing it my way because I thought I was being helpful in getting us the A. And we got the A on the project, and then my teammates scattered like startled birds. They couldn't get away from me fast enough. And after a couple of projects like this, I'm like, wow, these are completely different people and the common denominator is me. So I learned to listen better and collaborate better and not be so fixed that my way was the only way when I was teaming with people. I learned how to do those things. And then I still got good results, but I also didn't have people who really couldn't stand me. And it was hard because I was energetically sensitive enough to know if I was working somebody's last nerve and they were not enjoying me, even if they were super polite about it. But I didn't necessarily know how to fix it. So my 20s were an awkward and psychologically and emotionally painful time while I got some of this sorted out. But I want to offer the part where, looking at this really pragmatically, am I the common denominator? Am I getting my feelings really badly hurt and ending a bunch of relationships over and over again with people I really care about? And I totally get, I know that in emotionally relating to people, there are going to be moments when my little girl wants to take her toys and go home because I'm so hurt and I just want to run away from the relationship so I never get hurt again. And inside of me, there's this longing for the person to chase after me and figure it out without my having to use my words and apologize and woo me back with loving words while I push them away. And that's not a really healthy dynamic for an adult. If you're 5, yeah, mom could, come coax if you got hurt enough that you pulled away. But when you're an adult, you really need to parent that part of yourself. So I have Brené's Brown rule of don't talk, don't text, don't type when I'm in that situation. And I just go get right with myself before I try to straighten it out with the other person. Because then I can sort, I can honor how hurt I was. And I can pragmatically look at, did they do what it feels like they did? And I just don't have people who behave really badly in relationships. So usually the answer is, well, what they did wasn't ideal. I might have some feedback for them about where we could have more success. But mostly they just had the misfortune to bump into a really old wound. And much as I don't enjoy having this experience, I'm going to go be responsible for cleaning this up. Because when you find people that you love and you leave them in the heat of the moment, that's a bad sign. Sometimes it's what happens because you need that energy to get yourself away from abuse, and that's just too much, and that impetus is created. But usually when I end a relationship these days at the level of health of my relationships, it is a coldly calculated, sober decision in that I've gotten past all the emotional hurt and all the reactivity and all the indignation, and I've really pragmatically looked at a way that, will this work for me or not? And one of the deal breakers for a relationship is if someone gets really triggered with me for something that I don't see as being outside of what I'm willing to hold myself accountable to. And if they're having a lot of trigger with me and pulling away and getting their feelings hurt, I'm not going to try to sustain deep relationship. I need them to be in the same responsibility I'm taking, which is when I get my feelings hurt, I'm going to go clean it up. And if they disengage unilaterally and then try to come back a long time later, I'm probably not going to let them into the same place. And I've been that person. I've been the person who broke relationships because I just got so hurt, and I'm happy not to be doing that in my life as it is now. So in evaluating this, just noticing, I feel like I have a lot of skill that most of the population, I'm not going to trigger them. So in my 20s, the opposite was true. I was very unskillful. So just an ordinary interaction with me could be aggravating for the other person because I wasn't skillful. And I've gained enough people skills. Nonviolent communication is a really great one. So most people are probably going to respond positively to me based on my level of skill. And I can have a pleasant interaction and enjoy a high percentage of the population. And there are always those outliers of somebody who's just so in their own head, they're not taking in anything, they're totally projecting. And I don't think anyone can really have success with those people. But I'm pretty satisfied with the percentage of humans I can interact with successfully and not be unhappy about it. So my skill level and my skill set is really doing what I need it to do. And a question to ask yourself is, if you're bumping up against this issue, if there's one toxic person who's not wanting to take responsibility for a behavior that would upset a large percentage of the population, you might think about walking away, because the more hurt you get and the more repeatedly you're hurt, the more reactivity is increased. So it doesn't mean that you couldn't survive someone else's behavior that doesn't work for you. But again, there are a lot of people in the world, and it's just more fun if you have people who treat you in a way that works for you. And at the same time, if there's only 1 in 1,000 people who have enough distinctions to treat you in a way that works for you, that would tell me that it would point to inner work. There's something that ideally, if you were to heal it inside of you, would allow you to have more success with a larger number of humans. And I get that there's sort of a defensive shielding around, well, I'm just special and unique and therefore people don't get me. And that's okay if that's what's alive for you. But I'm pretty weird and wacky and non-traditional in some ways, not so much in other ways, but, I am living life as a shamanic practitioner professionally and, have a number of data points that are sort of not particularly mainstream about how I live my life that I won't go into here. But I still really enjoy people. I'm an introvert, so I spend a lot of alone time, but there's a really authentic enjoyment and a deep, rich, successful social circle. And where I was with my levels of reactivity would not have made that available when I was in my 20s. And so differentiating sensitivity is just fine. You're going to catch nuance. And frankly, if somebody's just a little aggravated about me, I'd rather check it out, Wow, it sounds like you're annoyed. Did I step on your toes in some way? Is there something that's not working here? And if they blow up and scream, you're just so sensitive, when I've said that in a really neutral tone of voice with neutral energy behind it, I'm not the one who's reactive. They're reactive and they don't want to deal with it for whatever reason, which, is valid. Lots of people are really scared and don't have skill sets for talking about what's not working for them. But I probably wouldn't go out of my way to spend time with someone if that was a real habitual kind of interaction. So differentiating between whether there's inner work, whether the feedback from another person is about you being really hard to be in relationship with because you take offense where none is intended. And when you take offense, you take really, really big offense and it's super disruptive to the relationship, which again can be healed. I get it. I've been there. I've been that person. Or whether someone has an agenda of not being responsible or is just a bad match. Like there are people who I just wouldn't try to spend time with them because they're not attuned to the level of nuance that I really enjoy in delicious relating. So it's hard to come into rapport with someone who is a little blunter and more intense and not really reading body language and cues in a particularly skillful way. And so I hope this is helpful. I know it's a complicated topic. I know it's a topic that can have a lot of pain because if you're someone who's in high reactivity, there's often a lot of shame about that and a lot of wishing that wasn't true. And a lot of people then turn that around and construct a story of how someone else is bad and wrong. And that's okay, but it's not going to get you success in relating. It'll make healthy people give you a really wide berth. And then it'll be super confusing because the people who do try to relate to you are probably less healthy. So you'll get unhealthy people who create their own kind of chaos. So all of this is to say, I know from personal experience and a lot of people that I've worked with, this reactivity and lack of emotional resilience where you don't recover when you get hurt can absolutely be cleaned up. It can absolutely be shifted and changed. And your innate sensitivity isn't something that's wrong or bad. You can be incredibly energetically sensitive and incredibly emotionally sensitive and not highly reactive. I just have a low tolerance for passive aggressive and I have a good ear for it and I can read the energy really clearly. So if someone's attempting to express themselves in some unhealthy ways and not owning it, I know to walk away and I have the inner clarity. So a lot of this is getting clear enough to have discernment in your relationships about whether it's inner work or whether it's a mismatched relationship, whether it's not a good place for you to be. And again, one of the test measures is what percentage of the human population can you have success with? Because if that's a really low number, I would so encourage you to just spend a little time working on a few skills. It'll help you in terms of livelihood and relationship and longevity and enjoyment of life. There's so much that is opened for you by being able to be easeful and successful with other people and not frightened all the time that they'll hurt you. It's a hard way to live, I know from personal experience. So I hope if you're in that condition that there's some wisdom for you here that's helpful. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.